Dawn broke over the Arizona-New Mexico borderland, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. The autumn air carried a biting chill, a sharp contrast to the scorched earth below. In the shallow bed of a dried river, a man lay dying. Mason Reed's blood soaked through his cotton shirt, pooling beneath him on the sand. Each labored breath sent waves of pain through his body as he stared up at the reddening sky. 36 hours of running, and this was where it would end. Alone in the dirt, miles from anywhere that mattered. 10 feet away, Ayanna Whitefeather stood motionless, her slender figure tense with indecision. The rope burns around her wrists were fresh, her deerskin dress torn at the shoulder. She clutched a knife in her right hand, eyes fixed on the wounded white man. She had been tracking the riverbed since escaping the trading post at Echo Creek, hoping the watercourse would lead her to familiar territory. Instead, she'd found him, another white man, another threat, or perhaps just another corpse soon enough. Mason's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever and pain. His cracked lips parted, forming words she couldn't quite hear. Ayanna hesitated, then moved closer, her moccasins silent on the sand. St. Elmo Treaty. Find Catherine, he whispered before his eyes rolled back. Ayanna froze. St. Elmo, the name of her village before the soldiers came, before the flames and screams, before her sister died and her mother was taken. A sound caught her attention. Distant hoofbeats, growing louder. Riders coming from the east, kicking up dust on the horizon. She had seconds to decide. Kill him and run? Leave him to die? Or Ayanna sheathed her knife and knelt beside Mason. With strength born of desperation, she hooked her arms under his shoulders and began dragging him toward the shadow of a rock outcropping nearby. His blood left a dark trail in the sand that she hastily brushed away. As she pulled him into the shade of the rocks, his head lolled against her shoulder, his breath hot against her neck. Catherine, he murmured again, lost in delirium. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed. Ayanna pressed herself against the rocks, one hand over Mason's mouth. 4 men on horseback approached the spot where Mason had fallen. One dismounted, kneeling to examine the blood-stained sand. He wore a cavalry jacket with the insignia removed. He can't have gotten far, the man said, standing. Not with that wound. Spread out and find him. Blackburn wants those documents. The riders fanned out along the riverbed. Ayanna remained motionless, scarcely breathing, until they passed beyond the bend in the river. Only then did she remove her hand from Mason's mouth. In the deepening shadow of the rock, she studied his face. Strong jawline, weathered skin, a long scar across his chin. Not young, perhaps 40, with strands of gray in his dark hair. A soldier or scout, judging by his build and clothing. An enemy, by any measure. Yet he had spoken of St. Elmo. And Catherine, a name Ayanna had heard whispered among the elders before the raid. Who are you? You, she murmured in Apache, not expecting an answer. Mason's eyes remained closed, his breathing shallow. Blood continued to seep from the wound in his chest. Without treatment, he would be dead by nightfall. Ayanna closed her eyes briefly, thinking of her sister Nita, who would have helped anyone in need, enemy or friend. Thinking of her mother Kimamela, who believed in the sacred duty of healing. She made her decision. 36 hours earlier. Mason Reed stood at attention in Colonel Theodore Blackburn's office at Fort Garrison, his expression carefully neutral, despite the tension in his shoulders. 5 years since he'd set foot in a military outpost. 5 years since he'd spoken to Blackburn. It's a straightforward assignment, Reed, Blackburn said, pushing a leather satchel across his desk. Deliver these documents to Fort Jameson. That's all. Mason didn't touch the satchel. I'm not in the service anymore, Colonel. Haven't been since St. Elmo. Blackburn's expression hardened. He was 58 but looked older, his hair gone completely white, his uniform impeccable as always. This isn't an official assignment. It's a personal request. The documents concern certain irregularities that need addressing. Find another courier. There is no one else I can trust with this. Blackburn stood, walking to the window that overlooked the parade ground. These papers could change things for a lot of people, including the Apache. Mason felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of the tribe. What kind of irregularities? Land disputes, water rights. Blackburn turned. The St. Elmo Treaty, the name hung in the air between them. Mason's hands clenched involuntarily. You said that treaty was destroyed in the fire, he said quietly. I was wrong. Blackburn's gaze was steady. There's evidence it still exists. These documents will help locate it. Mason studied the older man's face, searching for the lie. Why me? Because despite everything, you're still the best scout I know. And because you're the only one who cared enough about that treaty to risk his career over it. Blackburn paused. And because you owe it to Catherine. A flash of memory, Catherine's face, illuminated by firelight, her eyes wide with fear as the flames consumed their home. Their daughter's cries from upstairs. The roof collapsing as Mason fought to reach them. Don't you dare speak her name, Mason said, his voice dangerously soft. I lost my daughter too, Reed. I want the truth as much as you do. Blackburn pushed the satchel forward again. Fort Jameson, Sheriff Holloway will know what to do with the documents. Mason stared at the satchel for a long moment. Then with a quick motion, he grabbed it from the desk. This is the last time, Blackburn. After this, we're done. The colonel nodded solemnly. Of course. As Mason turned to leave, Blackburn added, Be careful, Reed. There are people who don't want these documents delivered. Outside the fort, Mason mounted his horse and secured the satchel to his saddle. He didn't trust Blackburn, hadn't since St. Elmo, but the possibility of finding the treaty, of learning the truth about what happened to Catherine and their daughter, it was worth the risk. At the Echo Creek trading post, Ayanna lay on the dirt floor of a storage room, her wrist bound with rope. Through a crack in the wall, she could see two men talking outside, Wesley McBride and Franklin Cooper. Wesley was tall and powerfully built, with a scar bisecting his left eye. Cooper was shorter, softer, with the calculating eyes of a businessman. 200's my final offer, Cooper was saying. Apache women don't fetch what they used to. Too much trouble. Wesley spat on the ground. She speaks English. Reads it too. Worth at least 300 to the right buyer in Santa Fe. Fine, 300, but you handle transportation. I don't need the trouble if she escapes again. Their conversation shifted to other matters. Supplies, rumors of cavalry movements, complaints about the territorial governor. Ayanna listened carefully, gathering information as her mother had taught her. What about the old woman at Ironwood? Cooper asked eventually. Blackburn still paying you to keep her? Wesley nodded. Till he gets what he wants from her. Stubborn old witch won't talk, but she'll break eventually. They all do. Ayanna's heart raced. The old woman could only be her mother, Kimmy Mella. After 5 years of believing her dead, to learn she was alive and being held prisoner, she had to escape, had to find Ironwood. As night fell, the trading post grew quiet. Ayanna worked at her bonds with a piece of broken glass she'd found, sawing through the rope strand by strand. When her hands were finally free, she waited until the deepest part of night before easing open the storeroom window. The rain had started, a cold autumn downpour that would cover the sound of her escape. She slipped through the window, landing silently in the mud. The horses were tethered at the far side of the post. If she could reach them, a lantern flared in the darkness. Wesley stood in the doorway of the main building, rifle in hand. Going somewhere, girl? Ayanna ran. Behind her, Wesley shouted, boots splashing through puddles as he gave chase. She darted between buildings, heading for the tree line beyond the post. A rifle shot cracked the night, the bullet splintering bark inches from her head. She plunged into the forest, the darkness and rain her allies now. Wesley's curses faded behind her as she ran deeper into the wilderness, her heart pounding in her chest. Alive. Her mother was alive. Mason made camp in a narrow canyon, sheltered from the wind by high rock walls. He'd been riding hard for 2 days, avoiding main trails and settlements. Blackburn's warning about people wanting to intercept the documents had proven accurate. Twice he had spotted riders following his trail, though he had managed to lose them in the rough country. Now, with a small fire for warmth, he finally opened the satchel to examine its contents. Inside were several maps marked with property boundaries, official-looking documents with government seals, and a personal letter addressed to Sheriff Holloway. Most intriguing was a worn journal with Catherine's handwriting. Mason's throat tightened as he ran his fingers over the familiar script. The journal contained notes on water sources throughout Apache territory, geological surveys, and references to the St. Elmo Treaty. Catherine had been a geologist before their marriage, her expertise often sought by both the military and mining companies. The last entry was dated 1 week before the fire. T refuses to acknowledge the treaty's legitimacy despite his signature. Claims military necessity overrides previous agreements. Won't listen to reason regarding the aquifer's importance to both settlers and Apache. M agrees we must take the treaty to someone with authority beyond T's reach. M was Mason. T could only be Theodore Blackburn, Catherine's father. Mason closed the journal, his mind racing. Catherine had discovered something about the water rights in Apache territory, something important enough that Blackburn wanted to suppress the treaty, important enough to... No, he couldn't allow himself to think that Blackburn would have harmed his own daughter. The fire had been investigated, ruled an accident, a lamp overturned during the night. Yet doubt gnawed at him. Blackburn had opposed their marriage from the start, viewing Catherine's sympathy for the Apache as a betrayal of her upbringing. And after St. Elmo, when Mason had confronted Blackburn about the false intelligence that led to the attack on a peaceful village, the rift had become unbridgeable. Mason was so absorbed in these thoughts that he almost missed the sound. A pebble skittering down the canyon wall. He doused the fire with a handful of dirt and drew his revolver, melting into the shadows beside his horse. 4 riders entered the canyon, moving slowly in the darkness. The leader held a lantern aloft, its light gleaming off his scarred face. "I know you're here, Reed," called Wesley McBride. "Colonel sent me to help you with those documents." Mason remained silent. Wesley had been a fellow scout once, even a friend, before St. Elmo changed everything. "Come on now," Wesley continued, dismounting. "No need to make this difficult. Just hand over the satchel, and we can all ride out of here alive." "Blackburn sent you?" Mason called, his voice echoing off the canyon walls, masking his position. Wesley chuckled. In a manner of speaking, he wants those documents, just not delivered to Fort Jameson. "And if I refuse? Then we do this the hard way." Wesley raised his rifle. "Your choice, old friend." Mason fired twice from the shadows. One of the riders fell, the others scattered for cover. Wesley dove behind a boulder, returning fire. The canyon erupted in gunfire, muzzle flashes illuminating the darkness. Moving quickly, Mason mounted his horse and urged it forward, firing as he rode. A bullet grazed his arm, another struck his horse's flank. The animal reared in pain but continued galloping through the canyon. As Mason rounded a bend, he felt a sudden, searing pain in his chest. The impact nearly knocked him from the saddle, but he clung on, bent low over the horse's neck as they galloped into the night. Behind him, Wesley's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Find him. Don't let him reach Fort Jameson." Mason rode until his vision began to blur, the pain in his chest becoming unbearable. Blood soaked his shirt, warm against his skin despite the cold night air. Eventually, the horse slowed, exhausted, and Mason slid from the saddle. He found himself in a dry riverbed, the moon providing just enough light to see his surroundings. With the last of his strength, he pulled the satchel from his horse and clutched it to his chest as he collapsed onto the sand. His last coherent thought was of Catherine, her face illuminated by firelight. Ayanna worked quickly, gathering what herbs she could find near the rock outcropping. Yarrow for the bleeding, juniper berries for infection. Her mother had taught her the healing ways since childhood, knowledge passed down through generations of medicine women. The white man, Mason, remained unconscious, his breathing labored. She had cut away his shirt to reveal the bullet wound below his right collarbone, a ragged hole that continued to seep blood despite her efforts to staunch it. As night fell, she managed to build a small, smokeless fire inside the shallow cave formed by the rock outcropping. By its light, she cleaned Mason's wound as best she could, packing it with crushed yarrow and binding it with strips torn from her own dress. Throughout the night, she kept vigil, periodically checking his forehead for fever. When he began to shiver, she reluctantly lay beside him, sharing her body heat to keep him alive through the cold desert night. Near dawn, Mason's eyes opened. For a moment, he stared at the rock ceiling in confusion. Then, with surprising speed for a wounded man, he reached for a weapon that wasn't there. "Easy," Ayanna said in English, moving back from him. "You are shot. Bad." Mason's eyes focused on her, narrowing with suspicion. "Who are you? Where's my horse? My satchel?" "Horse gone. Ran away." She pointed to the leather satchel she'd placed nearby, out of his reach. That's still here. Mason tried to sit up, gasping with pain at the effort. Why? Why did you help me? Ayanna studied him for a moment, deciding how much to reveal. You say St. Elmo Treaty when dying. I want to know why. Recognition flickered in Mason's eyes. You're from the village, St. Elmo. Was my home, before soldiers came, before fire. She held his gaze steadily. You soldier? I was, a scout. Mason leaned back, too weak to remain upright. I led the patrol to St. Elmo 5 years ago. Ayanna's hand moved to the knife at her waist, but she didn't draw it. You bring soldiers to kill my people? We were told there were hostile warriors in your village, planning attacks on settlements. Mason's voice was bitter. It was a lie. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. The attack had begun. Many died that day. My sister Nita, many children. Ayanna's voice remained controlled, but her eyes burned with old pain. My mother taken. I escaped. Mason was silent for a long moment, his face a mask of regret. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I tried to stop it once I saw there were no warriors, only families. Got shot for my trouble. He gestured to a faded scar on his shoulder. By the time I recovered, the official story was that the village had harbored hostiles who fired first. Why you have St. Elmo Treaty now? I'm trying to find it. The treaty was supposedly destroyed in the raid, but he hesitated. My wife believed it still exists. She died trying to protect it. Your wife? Catherine. Catherine Blackburn Reed. She was a geologist who worked with your tribe on water rights. She believed in the treaty, fought for it to be honored. Mason's voice broke slightly. She died in a house fire along with our daughter 5 years ago, just weeks after St. Elmo. Ayanna sat back, processing this information. Blackburn? Like the colonel? Her father. Mason's expression darkened. He opposed the treaty from the start, thought Catherine was being naive, letting sentiment cloud her judgment. Dawnlight began to filter into the shallow cave. Ayanna moved to the entrance, scanning the landscape for signs of pursuit. The riverbed stretched empty in both directions, but she knew the riders would return. We must move soon, she said. Men looking for you will come back. I can barely sit up, let alone walk. Then you die here. Ayanna gathered the few possessions she had, a water skin, her knife, a small pouch of healing herbs. I go find my mother. Mason struggled again to sit up, this time succeeding despite the pain evident on his face. Your mother? She's alive? At place called Ironwood. Men keep her prisoner. Recognition flashed in Mason's eyes. Ironwood Camp. That's a decommissioned lumber operation about 20 miles west, used occasionally by the military for unofficial business. You know this place? I've been there years ago. Mason grimaced as he shifted position. If your mother's being held there, it's on Blackburn's orders. He doesn't take prisoners without a reason. Ayanna considered this. You say your wife fight for treaty. My mother was keeper of treaty for our people. Maybe she know where it is now. Mason's eyes widened slightly. That would explain. He gestured toward the satchel. In there, journal. Catherine's writing about water rights, an aquifer that runs under Apache territory, valuable enough to kill for, apparently. Ayanna hesitated, then brought the satchel to Mason. He opened it with shaking hands, removing a worn leather journal. As he flipped through the pages, a folded paper fell out, a map with markings in both English and Apache symbols. This is it, Mason said softly. Catherine's research on the aquifer. And look, he pointed to a symbol near a mountain range. This is the Apache sign for sacred waters, isn't it? Ayanna nodded, surprised. You know Apache signs? Catherine taught me some. She worked closely with your tribe's elders. Mason studied the map more carefully. This could be the location of a copy of the treaty, or at least evidence of its existence. It's not far from Ironwood Camp. Their eyes met, a moment of understanding passing between them. Both had lost family, both sought truth, both had reason to distrust the other, and yet their paths had converged for a reason. Help me reach Ironwood, Mason said. We'll find your mother and the treaty together. Ayanna considered him for a long moment. He was still her enemy by any reasonable measure. a white soldier who had led the raid that destroyed her village. Yet he had also tried to stop the massacre, had lost his family seeking justice, and now held information that might lead to her mother. "There is place we can go first," she said finally. "Man who might help. Thomas Gray Wolf has cabin 2 hours from here." "Gray Wolf, the half-Apache scout?" Mason looked surprised. "I thought he died years ago." "No, lives alone now. No like people." Ayanna stood. "Can you walk?" Mason gritted his teeth and pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "I'll manage, but we'll need to move slowly." Ayanna nodded, gathering the satchel and slinging it over her shoulder. "Stay close. I know way to avoid riders." As they emerged from the shelter of the rocks into the morning light, an unspoken agreement formed between them, an alliance of necessity, fragile but essential for both their survivals. The desert stretched before them, harsh and unforgiving under the rising sun. Somewhere to the west lay Ironwood Camp, and with it, answers they both desperately sought. The journey to Grey Wolf's cabin was grueling. Mason struggled to keep pace with Ayanna, each step sending waves of pain through his chest. The bullet remained lodged near his shoulder, and though Ayanna's herbal poultice had slowed the bleeding, infection was a constant threat. They traveled along dry creek beds and through narrow canyons, avoiding open ground where they might be spotted. Twice they had to hide as riders passed in the distance, Wesley's men still searching. By midday, Mason's strength was failing. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid. Ayanna finally called a halt in the shade of a large juniper tree. "Rest," she instructed, offering her water skin. "Not far now." Mason drank gratefully. "Tell me about your mother," he said after a moment, partly to distract himself from the pain. "Why would Blackburn keep her alive all these years?" Ayanna settled on her haunches, scanning the horizon as she spoke. "Kimimela is medicine woman, keeper of stories, treaties, has," she tapped her temple, "special memory, can remember everything she sees, every word, every mark on paper." She memorized the treaty, Mason realized. That's why they need her. Ayanna nodded. Treaties show true boundaries of Apache land, show water rights, important paper. "And your sister, Nita, you said?" A shadow crossed Ayanna's face. "Nita was teacher, taught children Apache ways, but also English, reading. Soldiers kill her when she tried to protect children." She touched a spot on her shoulder where, beneath her dress, Mason glimpsed the edge of a tattoo. "She believed in eagle spirit, say our souls free like eagles, never captured." Mason was silent, absorbing this. The official report on St. Elmo had claimed 20 hostile warriors killed, with minimal civilian casualties. No mention of murdered children or teachers, just another lie in a war built on deception. "We should move," Ayanna said, rising. "Grey Wolf not like visitors after dark." They continued westward, the terrain growing more rugged as they approached a line of low mountains. By late afternoon, they reached a narrow canyon with steep walls rising on either side. Ayanna led the way confidently, following what appeared to be a game trail. The canyon twisted and turned, eventually opening into a small, hidden valley. In its center stood a modest cabin of weathered logs, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A corral held 2 horses, and a small garden of native plants grew beside a clear spring. "Wait," Ayanna said, holding up her hand. "I go first." He nervous with strangers. She approached the cabin openly, calling out in Apache. For several moments, there was no response. Then the door creaked open, and a rifle barrel emerged, followed by the weathered face of Thomas Gray Wolf. He was tall for an Apache, with streaks of white in his long black hair. His features suggested mixed heritage, the high cheekbones and dark eyes of his mother's people, the strong jaw and nose of his father's. He wore buckskin trousers and a faded cavalry shirt, an incongruous blend of 2 worlds. Ayanna spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing occasionally toward Mason. Grey Wolf listened impassively, his rifle never wavering from its aim at Mason's chest. Finally, he replied in the same language, his voice deep and gravelly with disuse. Ayanna turned to Mason. "He say you can come, but no weapons. He remember you from before. Not sure he trust." Mason carefully removed his revolver and handed it to Ayanna. Tell him I understand, and that I'm grateful for his help. Grey Wolf watched this exchange with narrowed eyes, then finally lowered his rifle and stepped back, holding the door open in silent invitation. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly well appointed. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with cooking implements hanging nearby. Shelves held books in multiple languages, jars of herbs and medicines, and various tools. A table and chairs occupied the center of the room, while a curtained alcove presumably concealed a sleeping area. Grey Wolf gestured to a chair. "Sit," he said in accented English, "before you fall." Mason obeyed gratefully, his legs finally giving out after the long journey. Grey Wolf turned to Ayana, speaking again in Apache. She replied, then began gathering items from the shelves: bandages, jars of salve, a bottle of clear liquid. "She tells me you were shot by Wesley McBride," Grey Wolf said, turning to Mason, "that you seek the St. Elmo Treaty, that you are husband of Catherine Blackburn." "Yes to all three," Mason confirmed. Grey Wolf nodded thoughtfully. "I knew Catherine. Good woman, strong heart." He moved to help Ayana prepare the medicinal items. "The bullet must come out. It will be painful. I've had bullets removed before." "Not like this." Grey Wolf produced a wicked-looking knife and the bottle of clear liquid. "Apache way, no whiskey to dull pain. Only pain itself becomes the medicine." As Ayana heated the blade in the fire, Grey Wolf continued speaking, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality like a storyteller's. "5 summers ago, I guided Catherine Blackburn to St. Elmo Village. She studied water, find great aquifer beneath mountains. Clean water enough for all people for many generations." He gestured toward the distant mountains visible through the cabin window. "She make treaty between Army and Apache. Fair treaty, good for both peoples. But Blackburn didn't honor it," Mason said. Grey Wolf's expression hardened. "Blackburn find gold near aquifer source. Small amount, but enough to make him forget honor. He order attack on village. Say treaty lost in fire." The old scout's eyes grew distant. "I was there. Saw soldiers kill women, children. Not battle, slaughter." Ayana returned with the heated knife and medicinal supplies. Grey Wolf instructed Mason to remove his shirt and lie on the table. The wound looked worse in the cabin's light, inflamed and seeping. "Hold him," Grey Wolf told Ayana, who positioned herself at Mason's shoulders, her strong hands pressing him firmly to the table. What followed was a blur of excruciating pain as Grey Wolf extracted the bullet, cleaned the wound with burning liquid, and packed it with a poultice of herbs. Mason bit down on a leather strap, determined not to cry out, but darkness claimed him before the procedure was complete. When he regained consciousness, night had fallen. He lay on a pallet near the fire, covered with a worn blanket. His chest was tightly bandaged, the pain now a dull throb rather than the sharp agony of before. Across the cabin, Grey Wolf and Ayana sat at the table, speaking quietly in Apache. A pot bubbled over the fire, filling the room with the aroma of stew. Despite his weakened state, Mason felt hunger stir. He tried to sit up, drawing their attention. "The patient awakens," Grey Wolf observed. "Good, strong spirit." Ayana brought a wooden bowl of stew and helped Mason into a sitting position. "Eat, need strength." The stew was simple but nourishing. Rabbit, wild onions, and herbs in a rich broth. Mason ate slowly, his strength gradually returning. "Grey Wolf knows where my mother is kept," Ayana said as she watched him eat. "He has been watching Ironwood Camp." "Kimamela is strong woman," Grey Wolf added, "but even strong trees bend in long storm. 5 years she resists Blackburn's questions. 5 years she keep treaty secret." "Why didn't you try to rescue her before now?" Mason asked Ayana. "I thought she dead until 2 days ago," she replied simply. "Heard men at trading posts talk about old Apache woman at Ironwood." Grey Wolf nodded grimly. "Blackburn keep her existence secret. Tell everyone St. Elmo people all dead or scattered. Keep Kimamela hidden, try to break her will." "And the treaty itself?" "Hidden," Grey Wolf said. "Kimamela give to trusted one before raid. Only she know where." Mason absorbed this information, his mind working through implications. "So Blackburn needs Kimamela to find the treaty, and now he's sent Wesley to intercept me because Catherine's journal might lead to it as well." "Yes," Grey Wolf confirmed. But there is more you should know. He exchanged a glance with Ayanna, who nodded slightly. Wesley McBride has unusual connection to Blackburn, not normal soldier loyalty, something deeper. Mason frowned. They've always been close. Blackburn trusted him with sensitive assignments. More than trust, Grey Wolf said, his voice dropping. Blind devotion. Wesley take missions no other man would accept. Follow orders without question. Even when those orders, the old scout's eyes darkened with memory, even when those orders involve killing innocent people, Mason finished grimly. Grey Wolf nodded. There is secret between them, something personal. I do not know what, but it gives Blackburn power over this man beyond rank or duty. Mason considered this. Wesley had always harbored a particular hatred toward him, especially after he married Catherine, as if the marriage had been a personal affront rather than merely a professional disappointment. Whatever hold Blackburn has on him, it's made Wesley dangerous, Mason concluded, and desperate to prove himself. There's something else, Mason said, reaching for the satchel that lay nearby. Something in Catherine's journal about the treaty being more significant than just a local agreement. He withdrew the journal and carefully turned its pages until he found the entry he remembered. Here, she writes, T refuses to acknowledge that the treaty's authority extends beyond his jurisdiction. With the Secretary's signature, it becomes binding at the federal level. This is why T is so desperate to suppress its existence. Grey Wolf's eyebrows rose. The treaty bears signature of Secretary of Interior. This would make it federal law beyond Blackburn's power to void. Catherine must have taken it to Washington before the St. Elmo raid, Mason said. That's why Blackburn was so desperate to destroy all copies and suppress any knowledge of it. And why he killed Catherine, Ayanna said softly. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Outside, an owl called into the night. You believe Blackburn responsible for the fire that killed Catherine and your daughter? Grey Wolf finally asked. Mason stared into the flames. I never wanted to believe it. He was her father, but now, too many coincidences. The fire happened exactly when Catherine was gathering evidence about St. Elmo. Reports of a lamp accident when Catherine was always careful with fire, and I was conveniently away, investigating rumors of survivors from the village. Blackburn's sacrifice, own daughter for gold and power, Ayanna said, her voice tight with anger. Same as he sacrificed my people. Grey Wolf rose and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. You cannot stay here long. Wesley's men still search. By morning they may find your trail. We need to reach Ironwood Camp, Mason said, attempting to stand. Despite the meal and rest, he remained weak, his legs unsteady. Not yet, Grey Wolf said firmly. You too weak. Wound need time to heal. We don't have time, Mason insisted. If Blackburn realizes we're working together, he might move Kimimela or worse. Grey Wolf considered this, then nodded reluctantly. One night. You rest tonight, leave at dawn. I give you map, supplies. He turned to Ayanna. Show him Eagle Mark while I prepare. Grey Wolf disappeared behind the curtained alcove, leaving Mason and Ayanna alone by the fire. She hesitated, then slowly pulled aside the shoulder of her dress to reveal a tattoo. A stylized eagle in flight, its wings spread wide across her shoulder blade. Nita had same mark, she explained. She say eagle is spirit of freedom. Cannot be caged, even in death. Her voice softened. Night before raid, she tell me, if anything happened to me, look for eagles. I will watch over you. Mason studied the tattoo, recognizing the artistry and meaning behind it. It's beautiful, he said simply. Catherine, Ayanna began hesitantly. She was good woman? Respect Apache ways? The best person I've ever known, Mason replied, his voice rough with emotion. She believed people should be judged by their actions, not their race or birth. She saw the humanity in everyone. He smiled faintly at a memory. She learned Apache phrases to speak with the elders directly, insisted on understanding your customs before proposing any agreements about the land. Ayanna nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. Then we honor her memory by finding treaty, by making her work matter. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the cabin's eaves. The fire popped and sparked, casting long shadows across the walls. In this moment of quiet understanding, An alliance forged in shared loss began to strengthen into something more. Perhaps not friendship yet, but mutual respect. Grey Wolf returned with a rolled piece of hide which he spread on the table. It showed a detailed map of the region, with Ironwood Camp clearly marked. Camp has 6 buildings, he explained, pointing. Main house where Wesley stay, bunkhouse for men, storehouse, stable, cookhouse, and here, he indicated a small structure set apart from the others, cabin where they keep Kimimela. Guards? Mason asked. 6 men usually, more when Blackburn visit. Grey Wolf traced a route with his finger. This way safest approach. Canyon provides cover until last quarter mile. Blackburn himself visits the camp? Mason asked, surprised. Grey Wolf nodded grimly. Once each month, ask same questions, get same silence. Leave angry. He looked up. Next visit due soon. 2 days, maybe 3. Then we need to move quickly, Mason said. Get Kimimela out before he arrives. Grey Wolf rolled up the map and handed it to Ayana. Take my horses, faster than walking. He moved to a trunk in the corner and withdrew a rifle, which he offered to Mason. You may need this. Thank you, Mason said, accepting the weapon. For everything. Grey Wolf merely nodded. Rest now, dawn comes early. As Mason settled back on his pallet, exhaustion overtaking him despite his determination, Grey Wolf and Ayana continued their conversation in low tones, switching to Apache. Though Mason couldn't understand the words, the gravity in their voices told him they were discussing risks, contingencies, possibilities of failure. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of Catherine's face, not as he usually remembered her, consumed by flames, but as she had been in life, laughing, eyes bright with purpose, believing in a better world where people of different races could live together in peace, a world that had died with her in the fire. Dawn arrived with a whisper of gold across the eastern sky. Mason awoke to find Grey Wolf already outside, saddling 2 horses. The old scout moved with the efficiency of long practice, his weathered hands checking cinches and bridles with methodical care. Inside the cabin, Ayana packed supplies, dried meat, corn cakes, medical herbs, and ammunition for the rifle. She had changed into clothing borrowed from Grey Wolf, buckskin leggings, a faded blue cotton shirt, and a leather vest that accommodated her slender frame surprisingly well. A red bandana held back her long black hair. How's the wound? She asked, noticing Mason watching her. Mason gingerly touched the bandage on his chest. The pain had subsided to a dull throb, manageable if not comfortable. Better, your medicine is strong. Grey Wolf's medicine, she corrected. He was Army Scout, but learned Apache healing ways too. Know both worlds. She secured the supply pack and handed Mason a shirt, also borrowed by the looks of it. We leave soon. Eat first. The morning meal was simple, corn cakes and strong coffee. Mason ate quickly, aware that each passing minute brought increased risk of discovery. Grey Wolf remained outside, keeping watch from a high point near the cabin. When he returned, his expression was grave. Dust to the east, riders coming. Not close yet, but moving this way. Mason stood, ignoring the protest from his injured body. Wesley's men? Grey Wolf nodded. 4 horses, following your trail, I think. Then we need to go now, Mason said, reaching for the rifle. Not that way, Grey Wolf cautioned. They expect you to head west toward Fort Jameson. Go south instead, through Devil's Canyon. Path difficult, but hidden. Ayana secured the last of their supplies to the saddles while Mason studied Grey Wolf's map one final time, committing the route to memory. The path to Ironwood Camp would take them through some of the most rugged terrain in the territory, slow going, but less likely to be patrolled. What about you? Mason asked the old scout. If Wesley finds your cabin, Grey Wolf's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Not first time someone come looking for me. Not find me unless I want to be found. He patted a revolver at his hip. Besides, old Wolf still has teeth. Ayana embraced the older man briefly, whispering something in Apache. He responded in kind, then placed his hand on her head in what appeared to be a blessing. To Mason, Grey Wolf offered a firm handshake. Fine treaty. Honor Catherine's work. Maybe then, both our peoples find peace. I'll do my best, Mason promised. They mounted the horses, Mason suppressing a grimace as the movement pulled at his wound. Gray Wolf handed him a small pouch. Medicine, for pain and fever. Take small amount when needed. Mason nodded gratefully and secured the pouch in his saddlebag. With a final look at the cabin that had provided brief sanctuary, he followed Ayana toward the southern end of the valley, where a narrow passage cut between towering rock walls. Behind them, Gray Wolf raised his hand once in farewell, then turned back toward his cabin. Whatever fate awaited him with Wesley's approaching men, he would face it with the stoicism that had carried him through decades of living between two worlds. Devil's Canyon lived up to its name. The narrow passage twisted between sheer cliff faces that blocked the sun, except for a few hours at midday. The ground was treacherous, loose shale and hidden sinkholes that could snap a horse's leg in an instant. They proceeded slowly, often dismounting to lead the horses through particularly dangerous stretches. Mason found himself increasingly grateful for Ayana's presence. She moved with the confidence of someone born to this harsh land, reading signs invisible to his eye. A bent twig indicating recent passage, a particular bird call, warning of predators nearby, subtle changes in the air that preceded weather shifts. By midday, they had traveled perhaps 5 miles as the crow flies, though the winding canyon made the actual distance much greater. They paused in a wider section where a spring bubbled from the rock face, creating a small pool of clear water. As the horses drank, Mason studied the canyon walls rising hundreds of feet above them. How much farther through this maze? Half day more, Ayana replied, refilling their water skins. Then open country for short time before mountains. Mason nodded, automatically scanning their surroundings for potential threats, an old habit from his scouting days. The canyon appeared empty, yet he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Something wrong? Ayana asked, noticing his expression. Not sure, just... Mason shook his head. Instinct, maybe. Feeling of being watched. Ayana immediately grew alert, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. She studied the canyon rim carefully, then the shadows among the rocks. Navajo land, this part, she said quietly. They not always friendly to Apache or white men. Would they attack us? Depends. Some bands still raid, others trade with settlements now. She nodded toward a narrow ledge partway up the canyon wall. Someone there earlier. See footprint in dust? Fresh. Mason spotted the faint impression she indicated, evidence of recent human presence that he had overlooked. We should move on. Quickly, but carefully. They continued through the canyon, both now hyper-aware of their surroundings. The passage narrowed again, forcing them to proceed single file, Ayana leading. The only sounds were their horses' hooves on stone and the occasional cry of a circling hawk. The attack, when it came, was swift and silent. A whistling sound was their only warning before arrows struck the ground around them. Mason reacted instantly, pulling his rifle from its scabbard as he scanned the cliff tops. Ayana had already dismounted, pulling both horses into the shelter of an overhanging rock. There, Mayom. Mason spotted movement on a ledge 30 feet above, the flash of a bow being drawn again. He fired a warning shot, deliberately aiming wide. The bullet struck rock near the hidden archer, sending stone chips flying. A shout echoed through the canyon, followed by rapid conversation in a language Mason didn't recognize. Navajo, Ayana confirmed, now beside him with her own weapon ready. 4, maybe 5 of them. We don't want to fight, Mason called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. We're just passing through. Silence answered him. Then a voice responded in accented English. This Navajo land, you Apache and white man, not welcome. We mean no harm, Mason replied. We seek someone captured by the army, a medicine woman named Kimamela. This provoked another burst of conversation among the hidden Navajo. Finally, the same voice called down, Kimamela of St. Elmo Village? Mason glanced at Ayana, who nodded. Yes, he confirmed. Her daughter travels with me. After a long pause, a figure stood on the ledge, a Navajo man of perhaps 30, wearing a mix of traditional clothing and items clearly traded from settlers. He carried a bow but had lowered it slightly. Come forward, Anise instructed, alone. No weapons. Mason hesitated, looking to Ayana for guidance. I go, she said quietly. They know name Kimamela. Good sign. It could be a trap, Mason warned. Could be help, she countered. We need horses, supplies. Cannot fight way to Ironwood alone. Before Mason could object further, Ayana had stepped out from the shelter of the rock, her empty hands held outward in a universal gesture of peace. She spoke a few words in what Mason assumed was Navajo, apparently enough of a greeting to cause the warrior to nod in acknowledgement. "Come up," the man directed, pointing to a narrow path cut into the canyon wall nearby. "Bring white man, if he can be trusted." Ayana turned to Mason with a raised eyebrow. He reluctantly slung his rifle across his back and secured the horses before following her to the hidden path. The climb was precarious, especially for Mason with his injured chest, but they managed to reach the ledge where the Navajo warrior waited. He assessed them with dark, expressionless eyes before gesturing for them to continue upward. "Camp there," he said, pointing higher. "Chief will speak with you." The camp turned out to be a small settlement built into a natural alcove in the canyon wall, invisible from below. Perhaps 20 people lived there, men, women, and children going about daily tasks among structures built of stone and timber. They paused in their activities to watch the strangers pass, their faces showing curiosity rather than hostility. Their guide led them to the largest structure where an elderly man sat on a woven mat, observing their approach with keen eyes. Despite his age, evident in his silver hair and lined face, he carried himself with dignity and strength. "Grandfather," the warrior said respectfully in English, presumably for the visitor's benefit, "these two seek Kimimela of St. Elmo. The woman is her daughter." The old man studied them carefully before speaking. "I am Running Elk. This band is under my protection." His English was slow but clear. "Why you look for Kimimela?" Ayana stepped forward. "I am Ayana White Feather. Kimimela is my mother. I believed her dead after soldiers attacked our village 5 years ago. Now I learned she lives, held prisoner at a place called Ironwood." "And you?" Running Elk turned his penetrating gaze to Mason. "Why does white man help Apache woman?" Mason met the chief's eyes steadily. "My name is Mason Reed. My wife worked with Kimimela on a treaty to protect Apache water rights. She died trying to defend that treaty." Running Elk nodded slowly. "I knew Kimimela. Wise woman, strong medicine." He gestured for them to sit. "3 summers ago, my grandson was shot by white hunters. We brought him to trading post, seeking help. White doctor refuse. Say no treat, dirty Indians. Kimimela there, helping Apache woman give birth. She come, use medicine ways, save my grandson's life." The chief touched a leather pouch hanging from his neck. "She give this medicine. Say use when fever come. Many times it save our children." His expression grew solemn. "We hear St. Elmo village destroyed. Thought all dead." "Many died," Ayana confirmed. "Some escaped, scattered." Running Elk considered this information. "And now soldiers hold Kimimela prisoner." "We." Mason explained about the treaty, the aquifer, and Blackburn's betrayal. As he spoke, other members of the band gathered to listen, their expressions growing increasingly troubled. When he finished, Running Elk conferred briefly with several older members of the group in Navajo. Then he turned back to the visitors. "Water is life in this land. Treaty that protects water protects all people. Navajo, Apache, even white settlers who respect the earth." He stood, his decision apparently made. "We will help you reach Ironwood, provide fresh horses, supplies, guide who knows secret paths." Mason bowed his head in gratitude. "Thank you, we're in your debt." "No debt, honor only." Running Elk gestured to a younger man nearby. "Swift Horse will guide you. Rest today, leave at dawn tomorrow." As they were led to a small dwelling where they could rest, Ayana murmured to Mason, "Apache and Navajo not always friends, sometimes rivals, sometimes enemies. But Kimimela's medicine reached across these boundaries." "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman," Mason observed. "She is." Ayana's voice held both pride and worry. "If she lives after 5 years as prisoner." "We'll find her," Mason promised, "and we'll make Blackburn pay for what he's done to both our families." They departed at first light the following morning, guided by Swift Horse, a wiry young Navajo warrior who moved through the landscape with silent efficiency. Their Navajo host had provided fresh horses, additional weapons, and supplies, generosity born of respect for Kimimela, and perhaps also a shared animosity toward the military forces that had displaced and harmed both tribes. The terrain gradually changed as they emerged from Devil's Canyon into more open country. Rolling hills covered in sage and juniper gave way to steeper, pine-forested slopes as they approached the mountains where Ironwood Camp was nestled. Swift Horse proved an invaluable guide, leading them along hidden game trails and dry stream beds where their passage would leave minimal traces. He spoke little but observed everything, often stopping to study distant dust clouds or listen to sounds inaudible to his companions. During a brief rest at midday, while Swift Horse scouted ahead, Mason found himself studying Ayanna as she checked their supplies. The past days had transformed his perception of her, from a potential threat to a capable ally. Her quiet competence, resilience, and unwavering focus on finding her mother had earned his respect. "Your wound," she said, noticing his gaze. "Need checking?" "It's healing," Mason assured her. "Grey Wolf's medicine is powerful stuff." Ayanna nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "This treaty, if we find it, what happens then?" It was a question Mason had been pondering himself. Legally, if it bears the Secretary's signature as Catherine believed, it would supersede any local agreements. The Apache rights to the land and water would be protected by federal law. And Blackburn, men who attacked our village? With evidence of the treaty's existence, they could be held accountable. Blackburn at least would face court-martial, possibly prison. Mason's jaw tightened. "And if we can prove his involvement in Catherine's death?" "Justice," Ayanna said softly. "But will white man's law give justice to Apache people?" It was a fair question, and one Mason couldn't answer with certainty. The history of broken treaties and ignored agreements between the government and native tribes provided little grounds for optimism. "I don't know," he admitted, "but Catherine believed it was possible that the law could protect all people if properly upheld." "I have to believe that too." Swift Horse returned before Ayanna could respond, signaling for them to continue. They rode in silence for several more hours, climbing steadily into the mountains. Late in the afternoon, they reached a ridgeline that offered their first view of Ironwood Camp nestled in a valley below. Just as Grey Wolf had described, the camp consisted of 6 buildings arranged around a central yard. The main house stood at the northern end, a substantial log structure with a porch wrapping around its front. To the west were the bunkhouse and cookhouse, to the east the stables and storehouse, and separated from the others, standing alone at the southern edge of the clearing, was a small cabin with a single window, presumably Kimimela's prison. From their vantage point, they could see men moving about the camp, 4 or 5 figures going about routine tasks. A wisp of smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney, and horses grazed in a paddock behind the stables. "No extra activity," Mason noted, studying the scene through a small spyglass from his saddlebag. "Doesn't look like they're expecting trouble." Swift Horse pointed to a stand of pines about a quarter mile from the isolated cabin. "Good place to watch, hidden." Mason nodded in agreement. "We'll need to observe their routines before attempting anything. Learn the guard schedules. See how often they check on the prisoner." "We wait until dark?" Ayanna asked. "Yes, less chance of being spotted approaching." They retreated from the ridgeline and made their way carefully down toward the pine grove Swift Horse had indicated. There among the dense trees, they established a small camp, taking care not to create the smoke that might be visible from the valley. As dusk settled over the mountains, Swift Horse departed, melting into the forest with a promise to return in 2 days. "Navajo eyes and ears useful," he explained. "Will bring more help if needed." Left alone, Mason and Ayanna took turns observing the camp through the spyglass. The activities below followed predictable patterns: men gathering for the evening meal, guards changing shifts, lamps being lit as darkness fell. When full night arrived, they moved closer, finding concealment in a dry creek bed that ran within 100 yards of the isolated cabin. From this position, they could make out 2 guards, one patrolling the main yard, another posted directly outside Kimimela's cabin. "Too many men for direct approach," Mason whispered. "We need a distraction." They watched through the night, noting every detail of the camp's operation. Shortly before dawn, they retreated to their hidden camp to rest and plan. The pattern repeated the following day: observation, assessment, planning. It was during their second night of surveillance that they witnessed the arrival of Wesley McBride, riding in with 2 additional men. Even from a distance, Mason recognized his former comrade's distinctive silhouette and the scar that bisected his left eye. This complicates things, Mason murmured. Wesley's no fool. He'll tighten security. Sure enough, within the hour, additional guards were posted around the perimeter of the camp. The man stationed outside Kimimela's cabin was replaced with two, and torches were lit at regular intervals to illuminate the grounds. They expecting something, Ayana observed. Maybe know we coming. Or Blackburn is coming, Mason suggested. Grey Wolf said his monthly visit was due soon. They continued to watch as activity in the camp gradually settled for the night. Around midnight, the door to Kimimela's cabin opened, and Wesley emerged, followed by another figure, a tall man in a cavalry uniform whose white hair gleamed in the torchlight. Blackburn, Mason breathed, instinctively tightening his grip on the rifle beside him. He's here. Through the spyglass, he could make out Blackburn's face, the hard set of his jaw, the ramrod-straight posture that hadn't changed in decades of military service. The colonel spoke briefly to Wesley, then turned and strode toward the main house, leaving his subordinate outside the cabin. We need to hear what they're saying, Mason decided. I'm going closer. Ayana caught his arm. Too dangerous. Too many guards now. There's a drainage ditch that runs behind the buildings, Mason pointed out. I scouted it earlier. It provides cover almost to the back of the main house. If I can get close enough to hear their conversation. I go, Ayana countered. Move quieter than you. Know how to listen without being seen. Mason hesitated, torn between concern for her safety and acknowledgement of her superior stealth abilities. If you're caught, won't be. Her confidence was absolute. Finally, he nodded. Be careful. At the first sign of trouble, retreat immediately. We'll meet back at the camp. Ayana slipped away into the darkness, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Mason watched her progress through the spyglass until she disappeared into the shadows near the camp's perimeter. What followed was perhaps the longest hour of Mason's life. Every sound from the direction of the camp, a guard's call, a door closing, a horse's whicker, sent a spike of anxiety through him. Had she been discovered? Captured? Or worse? Just as he was considering a reckless approach to search for her, Ayana materialized beside him, her sudden appearance nearly causing him to jump. How do you do that? He whispered, his relief evident. Apache way, she replied simply, settling beside him. I hear them talk. Blackburn angry. Treaty still missing. Says something about Secretary's signature making it dangerous. Did you see your mother? Ayana shook her head. No, but heard guards say she refused food again. Blackburn say he'd take her to fort tomorrow if she not cooperate. Last chance. Mason considered this development. If he moves her to the fort, our chances of rescuing her drop considerably. We must act tonight, Ayana insisted. No more waiting. Mason nodded slowly. Agreed, but we'll need a significant distraction. He studied the layout of the camp one more time, his military training asserting itself as he formulated a plan. The stables. If we could set a fire there, the horses would create case, draw most of the men away from your mother's cabin. How we get past guards at cabin? That's where I'll need your help. Can you create a distraction at the far side of the camp while I deal with the stables? Ayana nodded. When? Mason checked the position of the moon. 2 hours, when the guard rotation happens. They'll be at their least alert during the changeover. They spent the intervening time checking weapons and finalizing details. Mason would approach from the west, using the drainage ditch to reach the rear of the stables undetected. Ayana would circle to the northern edge of the camp, where the rugged terrain provided cover almost to the perimeter. When the appointed time arrived, they clasped hands briefly, a warrior's gesture of mutual respect, before separating into the darkness. Mason made his way carefully down the slope toward the camp, every sense heightened. The wound in his chest still ached, but the urgency of their mission pushed the pain to a distant corner of his awareness. He reached the drainage ditch without incident and began crawling along its length, the dry earth crumbling beneath his elbows. The camp was quieter now, most men asleep except for the guards. Mason counted 4 visible sentries, 1 near the main house, 1 patrolling the central yard, and 2 at Kimimela's cabin. Others might be posted at the perimeter, but they weren't visible from his position. He reached the back of the stables without being detected. The building smelled of hay and horses, the animals inside occasionally shifting and snorting in their sleep. A small window at the rear provided access. Tight, but manageable. Mason glanced toward the northern edge of the camp, waiting for Ayana's signal. Right on schedule, a series of sharp whistling sounds cut through the night, perfect imitations of coyote calls, but in a pattern no animal would produce. The guards reacted immediately, turning toward the disturbance. One called out a challenge, raising his rifle. In the next moment, a small object arced through the air from the darkness, landing near the main house with a burst of sparks and smoke. One of the signal flares the Navajo had provided. The camp erupted in confusion. Shouts rang out. Men emerged from the bunkhouse half-dressed, and the guards converged on the source of the commotion. It was the diversion Mason needed. He squeezed through the stable window, dropping silently into the hay-strewn interior. The horses stirred nervously, sensing his presence. Working quickly, Mason gathered hay into small piles near the wooden walls, then used matches to set them alight. He didn't want to harm the horses, just create enough smoke and panic to draw attention. As the first flames caught, Mason opened the stall doors, giving the animals a clear path to escape. Then he slipped back out the window, circling toward Kimimela's cabin where, as hoped, only one guard remained, the other having rushed to investigate the commotion at the main house. The lone guard never saw the blow that rendered him unconscious. Mason caught the man's body before it hit the ground, dragging him into the shadows. By now, smoke was billowing from the stable, and the first horses had broken free, adding to the chaos as they galloped through the camp. Mason tried the cabin door, locked, as expected. A quick search of the unconscious guard yielded a key. He inserted it with shaking hands, turned the lock, and eased the door open. The interior was dark save for a sliver of moonlight through a small window. A figure sat motionless on a narrow cot against the far wall. "Kimimela," Mason whispered. "I'm here to help. Ayana sent me." The figure raised her head slowly. In the dim light, Mason could make out the features of an elderly Apache woman, her face deeply lined, her silver hair braided and falling over one shoulder. Despite the evident hardship of her captivity, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "Ayana lives?" Her voice was soft but clear, with only a slight accent. "Yes, she's nearby. We need to go now while everyone is distracted." Kimimela rose steadily, requiring no assistance despite her years and ordeal. She wore a simple dress of faded blue cotton, her feet bare on the rough wooden floor. Around her neck hung a leather pouch similar to the one Running Elk had shown them. "They come," she said suddenly, turning toward the door. "Many men." Shan heard it too, shouting, closer now, the chaos shifting from the burning stable toward their location. Someone had discovered the missing guard or noticed the open cabin door. "We need to move quickly," he urged, taking her arm. "Can you run?" "Yes." There was steel in her simple answer. They slipped out of the cabin, staying low and close to the shadows. The camp was in disarray, men shouting orders, horses still running loose, the stable now fully engulfed in flames that cast writhing shadows across the yard. Mason led Kimimela toward the drainage ditch, their planned escape route. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a shout rang out behind them. "There, the prisoners escaping!" Gunfire erupted, bullets kicking up dirt around them. Mason pushed Kimimela ahead of him, turning to return fire with his revolver. Two quick shots, and one of the pursuers fell. The others took cover, continuing to fire but with less accuracy. They reached the drainage ditch, sliding down its sandy bank. Kimimela moved with surprising agility for a woman her age, following Mason's lead without hesitation. "Ayana will meet us in the trees," Mason explained as they ran, hunched over in the shallow ditch. "She's creating diversions to cover our escape." As if on cue, a series of small explosions sounded from the far side of the camp. More of the Navajo signal flares deployed to maximum effect. Fresh shouts of confusion rose from their pursuers. They reached the end of the ditch, where it opened into rougher terrain leading up to the pine grove. Just as they started the climb, Mason heard a familiar voice behind them. "That's far enough, Reed." Wesley McBride stood 20 yards away, his rifle aimed steadily at Mason's chest. Behind him, two more men appeared, their weapons also raised. "Let the woman go, Wesley," Mason said, positioning himself between Kimimela and the guns. "This isn't about her." Wesley's scarred face twisted in a mirthless smile. "Oh, but it is. She's the key to everything." He took a step forward. "Step aside, Mason. I don't want to kill you, but I will." "Like you killed Catherine?" Mason's voice was cold. "Was that your work? Or did Blackburn handle his own daughter personally?" Something flickered in Wesley's eyes. Surprise or perhaps guilt. Catherine was an accident, a tragedy, a convenient one for Blackburn. "You don't understand the bigger picture," Wesley insisted. "The treaty threatens everything. Development, progress. One tribe can't be allowed to control resources needed by thousands of settlers." "It's their land," Mason countered. "Their water, recognized by federal law." Wesley's jaw tightened. The law can be changed. Blackburn has friends in Washington who will ensure the treaty is invalidated once we have it. "Is that why you've kept Kimamela alive all these years? Hoping she'll lead you to it?" "Among other reasons." Wesley glanced at the elderly woman with something like reluctant respect. "She's stubborn, won't break, but everyone has a limit." Mason's mind raced, searching for options. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The pine grove where Ayanna waited was tantalizingly close, but they'd never make it without covering fire. As if reading his thoughts, Wesley shook his head. "Don't try it, Mason. You'll both die before you reach the trees." From behind Mason, Kimamela spoke for the first time since their capture. Her voice carried a quiet authority that made even Wesley pause. "You will not win this fight, Wesley McBride. The treaty is protected by powers greater than your guns." Wesley scoffed. "Superstitious nonsense. There's no magic protecting that paper." "Not magic. Truth." Kimamela took a step forward, her bearing regal despite her simple dress and bare feet. "The truth cannot be killed, even when those who speak it are silenced." Something in her calm certainty seemed to unnerve Wesley. He shifted his weight, his rifle barrel dipping slightly. It was the opening Mason needed. In one fluid motion, he drew and fired his revolver, aiming not at Wesley but at the lantern held by one of his men. The glass shattered, spilling oil that ignited instantly, creating a wall of fire between them. "Run!" Mason shouted to Kimamela, firing again to force Wesley and his men to take cover. They sprinted for the trees, bullets whistling past them. Just before reaching the shelter of the pines, Mason felt a searing pain along his arm, a bullet grazing his bicep. He stumbled but kept moving, following Kimamela into the darkness beneath the trees. Ayanna materialized from the shadows, embracing her mother briefly before leading them deeper into the forest. Behind them, Wesley's voice carried on the night air, ordering his men to organize a search. "We have horses hidden half-mile north," Ayanna explained as they ran. "Must hurry. They bring more men soon." Mason could hear pursuit already, crashes through the underbrush, dogs barking as they were released to track the escaping prisoners. The wound on his arm bled freely, and his earlier chest injury throbbed with renewed intensity, but he pushed through the pain, focusing on each step forward. They reached the horses without incident, 3 mounts provided by the Navajo already saddled and ready. Ayanna helped her mother onto one while Mason checked the saddlebags, confirming their supplies remained intact. "Which way?" he asked, mounting his own horse with effort. "North first," Ayanna decided, "through stream to Hyde Trail, then west toward Gray Wolf's Canyon. They'll expect us to head for the fort or a settlement," Mason agreed. "The wilderness gives us advantage." They rode hard through the night, pushing the horses as much as they dared in the difficult terrain. When they reached a fast-flowing stream, they followed its course for nearly a mile before emerging on rocky ground that would hold no tracks. Only then, with the sounds of pursuit faded to nothing behind them, did they slow their pace. Dawn was approaching, the eastern sky beginning to lighten. "We need to find shelter before daylight," Mason said. "Somewhere defensible if they catch up." Ayanna pointed to a ridge ahead. "Caves there. Gray Wolf showed me once. Good place to hide, can see anyone approach." They made their way to the cairn, a series of shallow depressions worn into a limestone bluff. The largest was deep enough to conceal them and the horses from casual observation, while offering a commanding view of the approach from the direction of Ironwood Camp. Once inside, Ayanna quickly built a small, smokeless fire for warmth. Mason collapsed against the cave wall, the adrenaline of their escape finally wearing off, leaving him lightheaded from blood loss and exhaustion. Kimamela knelt beside him, examining his injuries with practiced hands. "Bullet wound old," she observed. touching his bandaged chest. New one needs cleaning. Without asking permission, she opened his shirt to inspect the graze on his arm. You are Catherine's husband, she said as she worked. Not a question, but a statement. Yes, Mason confirmed, surprised. You knew her? Good woman, wise heart. Kimimela's fingers were gentle but efficient as she applied a poultice of herbs from a small bundle Ayana provided. She spoke of you often during our work on treaty, said you understand both worlds, like Grey Wolf. Mason winced as she bound the wound. I tried, not always successfully. Kimimela studied his face with penetrating dark eyes that seemed to see beyond his physical presence. You blame self for St. Elmo, for not stopping attack. I led the patrol there, Mason said quietly, based on Blackburn's intelligence about hostile warriors in the village. Blackburn knew truth, wanted land, water rights. Kimimela finished tending his wound and sat back. When Catherine discovered his plan, become danger to him. You believe he arranged the fire that killed her? Kimimela nodded solemnly. Man who sacrificed whole village for gold not hesitate to sacrifice own daughter. The confirmation of his long-held suspicion hit Mason with physical force. He had wanted to believe otherwise. That whatever Blackburn's other crimes, he couldn't have been responsible for Catherine's death. But deep down, he had always known. Why keep you alive all these years, he asked, when torture and threats failed to make you reveal the treaty's location? Blackburn not believe treaty has federal signature, Kimimela explained. Think only local agreement. Want to find, destroy before others discover. But Catherine's smarter than her father. A small smile touched the elderly woman's lips. She take treaty to Washington before St. Elmo attack. Get proper signatures. Make binding under highest law. Ayana, who had been listening while preparing a simple meal, joined the conversation. Where treaty now, mother? Safe place. Sacred cave in Ghost Canyon. Hidden behind waterfall. Kimimela accepted a cup of herbal tea from her daughter. Only I know exact location. Why Blackburn keep me alive? Mason absorbed this information. Ghost Canyon is 3 days' ride from here, near the territorial border. 2 days if we push, Ayana suggested. Mason shook his head. We need to rest first, recover strength. Wesley will have men searching every trail, and Blackburn may call in military patrols. He gestured to his wounded arm. Besides, I won't be much use in a fight right now. Kimimela observed their exchange with quiet interest. Daughter, she said to Ayana in Apache, this man has good heart. Wounded spirit, but good heart. Ayana replied in the same language, too quickly for Mason to catch more than a word or two. Whatever she said made her mother smile knowingly. They ate a sparse meal of dried meat and corn cakes, then took turns standing watch while the others rested. Mason insisted on taking the first shift despite his injuries, positioning himself near the cave entrance where he could observe the terrain below. The landscape stretched out before him, rugged, beautiful, unforgiving. Somewhere out there, Wesley and his men were searching, perhaps with army reinforcements by now. The odds against their small group were daunting, yet Mason felt a renewed sense of purpose. For 5 years he had lived with guilt and grief, seeking answers that seemed forever beyond reach. Now, finally, the truth about Catherine's death was coming into focus. The treaty she had fought for still existed, her work not entirely in vain. If they could reach Ghost Canyon and recover the document, they might yet achieve justice for Catherine, for the people of St. Elmo, for Kimimela's years of captivity. It would not bring back the dead or erase the suffering, but perhaps it could prevent similar atrocities in the future. As the sun rose over the eastern mountains, painting the landscape in golden shadow, Mason allowed himself something he had not felt in years: hope. The day passed with agonizing slowness. From their vantage point in the limestone cave, they observed 3 separate search parties combing the valleys below. Wesley had organized his men efficiently, systematically covering the most likely escape routes towards settlements and military outposts. Mason studied their movements through the spyglass, noting with grim satisfaction that none of the search patterns indicated awareness of their actual location. Wesley was operating on assumptions, logical ones, but assumptions nonetheless. He thinks we'd head for civilization, Mason explained to Ayana as they shared the watch during midday. Fort Jameson to the west, or the Navajo settlements to the east. He hasn't considered we might go north into the high country. Good for us, Ayana replied. Bad country there. Few water sources, difficult trails, but Mother knows ways through. As if summoned by mention of her name, Kimamela joined them at the cave entrance. She had spent most of the day resting, recovering strength after 5 years of captivity. Despite her ordeal, she carried herself with remarkable dignity, her movements deliberate and assured. We leave at dusk, she announced, her tone making it clear this was not a suggestion but a decision. Travel by night, rest during day. 3 nights to Ghost Canyon. Mason nodded in agreement. The searchers will expect us to lie low during darkness. Moving at night gives us advantage. What about Blackburn? Ayana asked. He sends soldiers? Eventually, Mason confirmed, but military patrols require official orders, documentation. That takes time, and Blackburn may hesitate to involve too many regular army personnel. The more people who know about Kimamela and the treaty, the harder to keep his actions secret. Kimamela settled beside them, her dark eyes scanning the distant mountains that marked their path ahead. Blackburn afraid of treaty now, more than before. Because of the federal signature? Mason asked. She nodded. Treaty not just protect Apache land from local development, has clause about water rights for all territories and region. Powerful men in Washington now involved in water projects. Blackburn's friends. So it's not just about gold anymore, Mason realized. It's about controlling the entire region's water supply. Water more valuable than gold in desert, Kimamela said simply. Man who controls water controls everything. The implications were staggering. What had begun as one colonel's greedy land grab had expanded into a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of territorial governance and perhaps beyond. The St. Elmo Treaty, with its federal certification, posed a threat to those plans, guaranteeing water rights to the Apache and, by extension, preventing any single entity from monopolizing this crucial resource. No wonder Blackburn had been willing to sacrifice his own daughter. The stakes were far higher than Mason had imagined. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they prepared for departure. Their supplies were limited, some dried meat and corn cakes from the Navajo, a few precious water skins, ammunition for Mason's rifle and revolver. They would need to forage along the way and rely on Kimamela's knowledge of desert plants and hidden springs. Darkness fell quickly in the mountains. Under its cover, they led their horses from the cave and mounted, Kimamela riding behind Ayana. With one final scan of the terrain below to confirm no search parties remained in the immediate vicinity, they set out northward, following a narrow game trail that wound through stands of pine and juniper. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead in the vast desert sky. A quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate without risking lanterns that might betray their position. They rode in single file, Kimamela guiding them with occasional soft-spoken directions to Ayana, who led the way. For Mason, bringing up the rear, the journey took on a dreamlike quality. The pain of his wounds had subsided to a dull ache, thanks to Kimamela's herbal remedies. The rhythmic movement of his horse beneath him, the vast silence of the wilderness broken only by nocturnal creatures, the silver-touched landscape stretching to the horizon, all combined to create a strange sense of peace despite the danger of their situation. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Kimamela directed them to a hidden spring just before dawn, where they refilled their water skins and allowed the animals to drink. Then they sought shelter in a deep arroyo lined with overhanging rock ledges that provided shade and concealment. Rest now, Kimamela instructed as they secured the horses. Long journey tonight, more difficult terrain. Mason took the first watch again, positioning himself where he could observe the back trail without being visible from below. The others settled into what shade they could find, Ayana and her mother conversing quietly in Apache. Despite his intention to remain alert, Mason found himself drifting, not quite sleeping, but not fully conscious either. Images floated through his mind, Catherine smiling in the doorway of their home, his daughter's small hand in his, the flames consuming everything he loved. He was startled fully awake by Ayana's touch on his shoulder. "My watch now," she said softly. "You sleep." Mason nodded gratefully and moved to a sheltered spot beneath the rock overhang. Before closing his eyes, he watched as Ayana took position at the lookout point, her slender silhouette outlined against the bright desert sky. There was something comforting in her vigilance, a steadiness he had come to rely upon in their short time together. He slept deeply, without dreams, and awoke to find the shadows had lengthened considerably. Kimamela sat nearby, weaving something from desert grasses with nimble fingers. "What are you making?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Medicine bundle," she replied, not looking up from her work. "For journey ahead. Ghost Canyon has powerful spirits. Must approach with respect." Mason sat up, accepting a water skin she offered. "You believe in these spirits?" Kimamela's hands paused in their weaving. "Not believe." No, she regarded him with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see through to his soul. "Your people say believe because you separate self from world. Apache know we are part of world, not separate. Spirits are real as wind, as water." "Catherine felt that way," Mason said quietly. "She saw patterns, connections I missed. Said the land itself was alive in some way." "Wise woman," Kimimela resumed her weaving. She understood treaty not just paper with words, is promise to land itself. They lapsed into comfortable silence. Mason checked his weapons, cleaned the barrel of his rifle, and examined the wound on his arm. It was healing cleanly thanks to Kimimela's poultice. As dusk approached, Ayana returned from her watch with news. Riders passed in valley below. 6 men, heavily armed. Not coming this way, but searching thoroughly. "Wesley's men?" She nodded. One was Wesley himself, recognized scar on face. "They're persistent," Mason observed. "We should assume they have expanded the search in all directions by now." "Which is why we travel high country," Kimamela said, rising and gathering her completed medicine bundle. "No horses there soon. Too steep. We leave animals and continue on foot." Mason frowned. "That will slow us considerably." "Better slow than dead," she replied pragmatically. "High trails known only to Apache. No white man find us there." They prepared to depart as the last light faded from the sky. This night's journey began much like the previous one, following game trails through increasingly rugged terrain, moving in silent single file with Kimimela providing directions. But as the hours passed, the landscape changed dramatically. The trails steepened, sometimes disappearing entirely as they traversed bare rock faces. Juniper and pine gave way to scraggly, wind-twisted trees that clung to precarious ledges. The air grew thinner, cooler, carrying the mineral scent of snow from distant peaks. Near midnight, they reached a narrow pass between towering cliffs. Beyond it, the trail became so treacherous that continuing on horseback would be suicidal. "We leave horses here," Kimimela announced. "Continue on foot at dawn, not safe to climb in darkness." They made camp in a small protected hollow just below the pass. Without the horses to consider, they risked a tiny fire, carefully shielded to prevent its light from being visible from below. The warmth was welcome in the mountain chill, as was the hot tea Ayana prepared. "How much farther to Ghost Canyon?" Mason asked, warming his hands around the tin cup. "1 day on foot," Kimimela replied. "Hard walking, but safe path, then half day to Sacred Cave behind Waterfall." "And the treaty is still there, after 5 years?" Kimimela nodded with absolute certainty. "Safe place, protected by nature and spirits. Only those who know exact path can find." Mason hesitated before asking his next question. "At Ironwood, Wesley said you had refused food. Were you—" He struggled to frame the delicate inquiry. "Planning to die?" Kimimela finished for him, her expression serene. "Yes, felt time had come. Blackburn's patience ending. Better to take treaty's location to spirit world than betray my people." She glanced at her daughter. "Did not know Ayana still lived. Now glad I remained strong 1 more day." Mother and daughter exchanged a look of such profound connection that Mason felt like an intruder witnessing it. He turned his attention to the fire, giving them a moment of privacy. Later, as Ayana took watch and Kimimela slept, Mason found himself staring into the dying embers, thoughts turning once more to Catherine. Would she be proud of his actions? After years of directionless grief and anger, was he finally honoring her memory properly? "She would be proud," Ayana said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. She had returned from her post to add fuel to the fire. Mason looked up, surprised. How did you know I was thinking about her? Your face shows it, becomes different when you remember. Ayana settled across from him. Tell me about her, about Catherine. Mason was silent for a long moment, unsure where to begin. Catherine had been the center of his world for so long, yet he rarely spoke of her to anyone. She was brilliant, he finally said. A geologist by training, but her mind encompassed so much more. She could identify every plant, every rock formation, read the land like others read books. A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. But it was her heart that truly set her apart. She believed in justice, in balance, thought different peoples could find ways to coexist if they recognized their common needs. Water, Ayana suggested. Water, land, peace. Mason nodded. She saw the St. Elmo Treaty as a model for future agreements, protection for Apache rights while still allowing for responsible development that would benefit everyone. Her father did not share a vision. No, Blackburn saw only obstacles to progress, resources to be exploited. Catherine's advocacy for Apache rights became a source of bitter conflict between them. Mason stared into the flames. When she married me, a scout from humble origins, sympathetic to her views, it only widened the divide. Yet she not give up. Never. Even after St. Elmo, when the evidence of her father's betrayal became clear, she fought to expose the truth. That's what got her killed. Mason's voice tightened. She found proof of Blackburn's deception, his plans to claim the aquifer for private interests, was preparing to take it to authorities in Washington when the fire happened. And your daughter? Ayana asked gently. Sarah. She was 4. Mason closed his eyes briefly against the pain of the memory. Full of life, curious about everything. Had Catherine's eyes, her smile. Ayana was quiet for a moment. My sister Nita died protecting children during raid. She used own body as shield from bullets. I'm sorry, Mason said, meaning it deeply. For many years I lived with hate, Ayana admitted. Ate all white men for what happened at St. Elmo. But Mother teach that hate is poison that kill person carrying it. A wise teaching, though not always easy to follow. No, not easy. Ayana's gaze was steady in the firelight, but necessary for survival, like breathing. They fell silent, the small fire crackling between them, each contemplating the losses that had shaped their lives and the unexpected alliance that now bound them together. Dawn brought clear skies and the daunting prospect of the mountain passage ahead. They redistributed essential supplies into packs they could carry, concealed the saddles and remaining items under brush, and released the horses to make their own way back to lowland pastures. They find their way to Navajo, Ayana assured Mason, who had grown fond of his mount. Good grazing there. The path beyond the pass was as challenging as Kimamela had warned, a narrow track that clung to steep mountainsides, occasionally disappearing entirely across stretches of bare rock where they had to find their own footing. Mason's wounded arm and chest protested at the exertion, but he pushed through the pain, determined not to slow their progress. Kimamela led the way with surprising stamina for a woman her age. Her knowledge of the route was impressive, every landmark familiar, every turn anticipated. Ayana followed closely, with Mason bringing up the rear, frequently glancing back to ensure they weren't being tracked. By midday, they had climbed high enough that the valley from which they had begun their ascent was a distant patchwork far below. The air was noticeably thinner, the sun more intense despite the cooler temperature. They paused to rest in the shade of a rocky outcropping, sharing a meager meal of dried meat and pine nuts Kimamela had gathered along the way. No sign of pursuit, Mason reported, scanning the lower slopes with his spyglass. I think we've evaded them, at least for now. They not give up, Ayana cautioned. Just not know which direction we go. Kimamela nodded in agreement. Blackburn desperate now, treaty more dangerous to him each day. Because of his powerful friends in Washington, Mason surmised. If they learn he suppressed a legally binding federal agreement for personal gain, not just personal, Kimamela corrected, many powerful men involved in water scheme, control aquifer, control future of territory. The implications continued to expand in Mason's mind. What had seemed initially like one colonel's corrupt land grab had evolved into something far more significant, a conspiracy that could affect the development of the entire region for generations to come. They resumed their journey after a brief rest, the trail now trending downward into a narrow valley between mountain peaks. Pine forests reappeared, providing welcome shade from the afternoon sun. Game was more plentiful here. They spotted deer and elk in the distance, and once a black bear that fortunately showed no interest in their passing. By dusk, they had descended into what Kimamela identified as the outer reaches of Ghost Canyon, a labyrinth of interconnected ravines and gorges that cut deep into the mountain range. They made camp in a sheltered hollow beside a clear stream, all three exhausted from the day's difficult trek. As night fell, Mason noticed a change in Kimamela's demeanor. The elderly woman became more solemn, performing small rituals before eating or drinking, sprinkling pinches of herbs into the stream, murmuring words in Apache that sounded like prayers or invocations. Ghost Canyon's sacred place, Ayana explained quietly when she saw Mason watching. Many spirits here, ancestors of Apache people. Is that why it's called Ghost Canyon? Ayana shook her head. White men name it that because strange sounds here. Wind through rock formations make voices, whispers. Apache always know this place as Valley of Echoes, where words of ancestors can still be heard. As if to confirm her explanation, a low moaning sound drifted through the canyon, haunting yet oddly beautiful, like distant flutes playing just at the edge of hearing. Mason felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Just the wind, he told himself, though he wasn't entirely convinced. They took turns standing watch through the night, though the canyon's isolation made discovery by pursuers seem increasingly unlikely. Mason's shift came in the deepest part of night, when even the nocturnal creatures had fallen silent. He sat beside the dying embers of their small fire, rifle across his knees, listening to the strange music of the wind through the rock formations. His thoughts drifted to Catherine again, but this time without the sharp pain that usually accompanied her memory. Instead, he felt an odd sense of her presence, not as a ghost or spirit, but as a continuing influence, a part of him that had never truly died. We're close, Catherine, he whispered into the darkness. Close to finishing what you started. The wind seemed to sigh in response, rustling the pine branches overhead. Morning revealed Ghost Canyon in all its stark beauty. Towering rock walls striped with bands of red and gold, twisted juniper trees growing impossibly from sheer cliffs, the clear stream winding like a silver ribbon along the canyon floor. They followed this stream deeper into the maze of interconnected gorges, Kimimela leading with unwavering confidence despite the confusing terrain. Several times they passed rock walls covered with ancient pictographs, faded red figures depicting hunts, ceremonies, and symbols whose meanings were lost to all but a few Apache elders. Near midday, they heard it, the distant rumble of falling water. Waterfall ahead, Kimimela announced. Sacred cave behind, treaty hidden there. The sound grew louder as they continued, eventually becoming a constant roar that echoed off the canyon walls. They rounded a bend in the gorge and saw it, a spectacular cascade of water plunging nearly 100 feet from the cliff above into a deep turquoise pool below. Mist filled the air, creating rainbows where sunlight penetrated the canyon. The beauty was breathtaking, almost otherworldly. Many avoid this place, Kimamela explained as they approached. Believe powerful spirits guard waterfall. Good protection for important things. She led them along a narrow ledge that skirted the pool, heading toward the curtain of falling water. The rock was slick with spray, requiring careful footing. Mason found himself holding his breath as they edged closer to the thundering cascade. At a point where the ledge widened slightly, Kimamela paused. The falling water was just feet away now, its roar so loud that conversation was nearly impossible. She gestured for them to wait, then removed the medicine bundle she had crafted from her pouch. With deliberate movements, she placed it in a small niche in the rock face, murmuring words lost beneath the waterfall's voice. Ritual complete, she beckoned them forward, then slipped behind the curtain of water. Ayana followed without hesitation. Mason paused briefly, steeling himself against the drenching that would surely come, then stepped the rapier through the watery veil. To his surprise, the space behind the waterfall was larger than expected, a shallow cave perhaps 15 feet deep and twice as wide. Light filtered through the cascade, creating an ethereal blue-green glow that illuminated the interior. The floor was remarkably dry, protected from the spray by the cave's configuration. Kimimela was already moving toward the back wall, where Mason could make out a narrow crevice. She reached into it with practiced movements, feeling around until her fingers found what they sought. With a grunt of effort, she withdrew a cylindrical object wrapped in oiled deerskin and bound with sinew. "The treaty," she said simply, holding it out for them to see. Mason's heart quickened. After 5 years of searching, of grief and guilt, and unanswered questions, here at last was the document Catherine had died protecting. "May I?" he asked, reaching for it with reverent hands. Kimimela nodded, passing him the bundle. Mason carefully unwrapped the outer layer of deerskin to reveal a copper tube, its ends sealed with wax. Breaking the seal, he slid out several rolled sheets of parchment. The St. Elmo Treaty unfurled before them, its formal language declaring the rights of the Apache tribe to their ancestral lands and the water resources beneath them. Mason's eyes quickly found the signatures at the bottom. Colonel Theodore Blackburn's familiar scrawl, several Apache elders' marks, witnesses from the territorial government, and, most crucially, the flowing signature of the Secretary of the Interior, accompanied by the official seal of the United States government. "It's authentic," Mason breathed. "Everything Catherine claimed. This makes the treaty binding at the federal level." "Which is why Blackburn wanted destroyed," Kimimela said. "Why he killed to keep secret." Mason carefully re-rolled the document, a profound sense of vindication washing through him. "With this, we can expose everything: Blackburn's corruption, the conspiracy to control the aquifer, the truth about St. Elmo. And justice for Catherine," Ayanna added softly. "Yes," Mason's voice caught. "Justice for Catherine." They rewrapped the treaty in its protective covering and prepared to depart. The journey back through the waterfall's curtain left them soaked but exhilarated, the precious document secured in Mason's pack. As they made their way back along the ledge surrounding the pool, Mason felt lighter than he had in years, as if a great weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. They had the treaty. They had the truth. Now they just needed to reach civilization safely to share it with the world. It was Ayanna who spotted the danger first, freezing in place, her hand raised in warning. Mason followed her gaze to the canyon rim high above them, where silhouetted figures were visible against the sky. "Riders," she whispered. "Many." Mason counted at least 8 men moving along the canyon's edge. From their methodical pattern, it was clear they were searching, and they had the high ground advantage. "How did they find us?" he murmured, pulling back into the shadow of a rock outcropping. "Not matter now," Kimimela replied pragmatically. "Must find different way out of canyon." They retreated, moving as silently as possible back toward the waterfall. The roar of the cascade would cover any sounds they made, providing temporary concealment. "There is another path," Kimimela told them once they were safely out of sight. "Through caves behind waterfall. Dangerous, but leads to north end of canyon. Less likely to be watched." "Lead the way," Mason said, glancing anxiously toward where they had spotted the search party. Kimimela guided them back through the waterfall into the cave, then to a dark opening at its rear that Mason had overlooked initially. The passage beyond was narrow and utterly black. "Stay close," she instructed. "Follow exactly. Many side passages lead nowhere. Easy to become lost forever." They proceeded in single file, one hand on the rough rock wall for guidance. Mason found himself counting steps, trying to maintain some sense of direction in the absolute darkness. The air grew cooler, heavy with mineral scents and the distant drip of water. After what seemed an eternity of careful progress through the lightless labyrinth, a faint glow appeared ahead. They emerged into a larger cavern illuminated by a shaft of sunlight from a small opening high above. The floor was slick with moisture, stalactites hanging like stone daggers from the ceiling. Kimimela paused, oriented herself, then pointed to another passage on the far side. "That way. Leads to hidden valley beyond canyon." They had crossed perhaps half the distance across the cavern when the relative silence was broken by voices echoing from the passage they had just exited. "They're in the biome," a man's voice, distorted by the cavern's acoustics, but recognizably Wesley's. "Spread out and find them." Run, Mason urged, drawing his revolver. They sprinted for the far passage, boots slipping on the wet stone. Mason took up the rear position, turning occasionally to watch for pursuers. They reached the passage just as lantern light bloomed in the tunnel behind them, illuminating several armed men entering the cavern. "There they are," someone shouted, followed by the crack of a rifle. The bullet ricocheted off stone near Mason's head, showering him with fragments. He returned fire, aiming not at the men, but at the lantern. His shot found its mark. The cavern plunged back into relative darkness, broken only by the shaft of natural light from above. Confusion and shouting erupted behind them as they plunged into the new passage. This one sloped upward, growing narrower as they ascended. Mason could hear pursuit gaining, multiple sets of boots on stone, angry voices coordinating the search. The passage eventually opened into daylight, a narrow ravine between towering cliffs. Ahead, the ravine appeared to widen into a valley, offering potential escape. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. "Go," Mason told Ayana and Kimamela. "I'll hold them off." "No," Ayana protested. "Together or not at all." "The treaty is what matters," Mason insisted. "Get it to Fort Gibson." Major Reynolds was Catherine's godfather, someone she trusted completely. "Show him the treaty, tell him everything." Ayana hesitated, torn between duty to the mission and loyalty to her companion. "Go," Mason repeated. "I'll catch up if I can." A rifle shot from the cave entrance settled the debate. Mason pushed the women toward the ravine's exit, then took position behind a boulder, rifle ready. The first man to emerge from the cave took a bullet in the shoulder, falling back with a cry of pain. The others became more cautious, firing blindly from the protection of the cave mouth. Mason used his ammunition sparingly, each shot carefully placed to maximum effect. He managed to hold the position for precious minutes, giving Ayana and Kimamela time to disappear into the landscape beyond. When his rifle's ammunition was exhausted, he switched to his revolver, continuing the defense with grim determination. But the outcome was inevitable. Outnumbered and outgunned, he couldn't hold them off indefinitely. A bullet grazed his thigh, another tore through his coat sleeve. Mason knew his luck was running thin. With a final glance toward the ravine where his companions had fled, he prepared to make a fighting retreat. Before he could move, a new sound echoed through the canyon, war cries in a language he recognized as Navajo. Arrows rained down from the cliff tops, followed by mounted warriors pouring into the ravine from both ends. Swift Horse led the charge, rifle raised, his face painted for battle. Behind him rode at least a dozen Navajo warriors, their sudden appearance throwing Wesley's men into panic. Caught between Mason's position and the attacking Navajo, the pursuers broke formation, some retreating into the cave, others attempting to stand and fight. The resulting skirmish was brief but intense. Mason, seeing his chance, abandoned his position and ran for the ravine's exit. A searing pain in his side told him he'd been hit again, but adrenaline carried him forward. Swift Horse spotted him, wheeling his mount around to provide cover. "Climb up," the Navajo warrior called, extending his hand. Mason grasped it, swinging awkwardly onto the horse behind Swift Horse. They galloped away from the fighting, following the path Ayana and Kimamela had taken. "How did you find us?" Mason gasped, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. "Follow your trail from Grey Wolf's cabin," Swift Horse explained. "Find dead horse scouts. Know you in trouble." They rode hard through the winding ravines, eventually emerging into a broader valley where, to Mason's immense relief, Ayana and Kimamela waited. "Mason!" Ayana rushed forward as Swift Horse helped him dismount. "You're wounded." "It's nothing," he lied, though the spreading bloodstain on his shirt suggested otherwise. "The treaty?" "Safe," she assured him, helping him to a sitting position against a boulder. "What happened?" "We heard fighting." "Navajo happened." Mason managed a pained smile towards Swift Horse. "Arrived just in time." Other Navajo warriors were appearing now, their battle concluded. From their animated gestures and triumphant expressions, Mason gathered that Wesley's men had been thoroughly routed. Kimamela knelt beside Mason, examining his wound with gentle fingers. Bullet passed through, clean wound, but much blood loss. She glanced at Swift Horse. "Need medicine plants, yellow flower that grows near water." The warrior nodded and dispatched one of his men to search for the required herbs. Wesley? Mason asked Swift Horse. Escaped into caves with 2 men, others dead or captured. The Navajo's expression was grim but satisfied. Will not follow soon. Too few now. Mason nodded, relieved. The immediate danger had passed, though he harbored no illusions that Blackburn would abandon the pursuit entirely. We need to reach Fort Gibson, he told Swift Horse, as quickly as possible. 3 days' ride, the warrior replied. Can provide horses, escort. No, Mason shook his head. Too dangerous for your people to be seen helping us openly. Blackburn would retaliate against your tribe. Swift Horse considered this, then offered an alternative. Take you to edge of settlement lands. Give horses. From there, you go alone to fort. That would work, Mason agreed. Thank you. While they spoke, Kimamela had been preparing a poultice from the plants brought by the Navajo scout. She applied it to Mason's wound, then bound it tightly with strips of clean cloth. Rest now, she instructed. Ride when bleeding stops. Mason wanted to argue that they should move immediately, but the lightheadedness from blood loss made the decision for him. He leaned back against the boulder, conserving strength for the journey ahead. Ayana sat beside him, the treaty secure in a pouch at her waist. Almost over, she said quietly. Soon truth will be known. Justice, Mason murmured, for everyone who died at St. Elmo, for Catherine and Sarah, for your sister. Yes, Ayana's expression was solemn, but justice not bring back dead. What comes after? It was a question Mason hadn't allowed himself to consider. For 5 years, his existence had been defined by grief and the search for answers. What would remain when that quest was complete? I don't know, he admitted. Never thought beyond finding the truth. Ayana nodded understanding. Same for me. Lived only to serve her, to find mother if she lived. Now, she gestured to Kimamela, who was conferring with the Navajo elders nearby. Found her, found treaty, purpose fulfilled. Perhaps that's the gift in all this, Mason suggested. A chance to find new purpose, to build rather than merely survive. Ayana considered this, her dark eyes thoughtful. Perhaps. They rested through the remainder of the day, the Navajo warriors establishing a perimeter of sentries to ensure no renewed pursuit could take them by surprise. Mason's wound, while painful, began to respond to Kimamela's treatment, the bleeding finally stopping. By dusk, he was able to stand with assistance, though mounting a horse remained a challenge. Swift Horse and his men had brought extra mounts, some from Grey Wolf's cabin, others from their own herds. They would travel through the night, taking advantage of darkness for concealment. As they prepared to depart, Kimamela performed a brief ceremony, a blessing for their journey, calling upon ancestral spirits for protection. Mason, who might once have dismissed such rituals as superstition, found himself oddly comforted by the ancient words and gestures. Their Navajo allies would accompany them to the edge of settled territories, providing protection through the wilderness. From there, Mason, Ayana, and Kimamela would continue alone to Fort Gibson, a journey of perhaps a day and a half if all went well. The treaty was secure, their path clear. Justice, so long denied, was finally within reach. As they rode out under the emerging stars, Mason felt Catherine's presence more strongly than ever, not as a ghost or spirit, but as a continuing influence, a purpose that transcended death. We're finishing it, Catherine, he whispered, just as you would have wanted. And somewhere in the whispers of the wind through Ghost Canyon, he almost believed he heard her answer. They rode in silence for a time, each lost in private thoughts. When they stopped to rest the horses near a small stream, Mason found Ayana sitting alone on a flat rock, gazing up at the brilliant canopy of stars. May I join you? He asked. She nodded, making space beside her. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence, the vastness of the desert night enveloping them. Are you afraid? Ayana finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason glanced at her, surprised by the question. Of what's ahead? Of after, when it's done. She met his eyes. For 5 years, your path was seeking justice. Mine was finding my mother. Soon both paths end. The question struck Mason with unexpected force. He'd never allowed himself to consider what might lie beyond that horizon. I don't know, he admitted. What about you? Yes, she said simply. Among my people, each person has a path given by Creator. Without path, she gestured to the open desert, like being in country with no landmarks. Mason nodded, understanding completely. Catherine used to say that endings and beginnings are often the same moment, just viewed from different directions. Wise woman, Ayanna said softly. She would have liked you, Mason said, surprising himself. In the starlight, he saw a hint of color rise in Ayanna's cheeks before she looked away. My sister Nita told stories about stars, she said after a moment. Said they were ancestors watching over us. Her voice grew softer. I stopped believing when soldiers came. And now? Ayanna touched the eagle tattoo on her shoulder. Now, I think perhaps she was right. Some spirits never truly leave. They become part of us, change our path. Mason felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection beyond their shared mission. For the first time since Catherine's death, he felt the possibility of something new stirring within him. Whatever comes after this, he said quietly. I'm glad our paths crossed, Ayanna Whitefeather. She met his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting starlight. As am I, Mason Reed. Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens, as if sealing some cosmic agreement about paths converging against all odds. 3 days of hard riding brought them to the outskirts of civilization. The transition was gradual. First a lonely homestead nestled against the foothills, then scattered farms, and finally the rutted wagon trails that marked regular travel between settlements. Swift Horse and his Navajo warriors accompanied them to this frontier's edge, where the wilderness gave way to mapped territories. This is where we part, Swift Horse said, as they paused on a ridge overlooking a small settlement in the valley below. Fort Gibson lay another half-day's ride beyond. Mason, still weak from his wound but improving under Kimimela's care, extended his hand to the Navajo warrior. We wouldn't have survived without your help. My debt to you can never be repaid. Swift Horse clasped Mason's forearm in the warrior's grip. No debt between those who fight common enemy. His dark eyes shifted to Kimimela. Your mother saved my cousin's son. Navajo remember such things. The elderly medicine woman nodded solemnly. Tell Running Elk that the waters will flow clean for all people now. Apache, Navajo, white settlers, all will drink from the same river. Swift Horse and his warriors melted back into the wilderness with the same silent efficiency that had marked their arrival. Mason watched them disappear among the pines, feeling both gratitude and apprehension at their departure. The wilderness had offered a strange protection. Ahead lay the unpredictable territory of civilization, with its own dangers. We should move, Ayanna said, adjusting the precious treaty in its oilskin wrapping. Reach fort before dark. They rode through the settlement at a steady pace, drawing curious stares from locals unaccustomed to seeing an Apache woman and her elderly mother traveling freely with a white man. Mason kept his hand near his revolver, alert for any sign of Wesley's men or Blackburn's influence. But they passed through without incident. By late afternoon, the walls of Fort Gibson appeared on the horizon, a substantial military installation that served as headquarters for the territorial command. As they approached the main gate, Mason felt a familiar tension return to his shoulders. 5 years since he'd willingly entered a fort. 5 years of avoiding the memories such places held. The sentries challenged them immediately, rifles raised at the sight of 2 Apache women accompanying a wounded man. State your business, the younger guard demanded, his finger resting near the trigger of his Springfield rifle. My name is Mason Reed, he announced, sitting straighter despite the pain in his side. I need to see Major William Reynolds immediately. Tell him it concerns Catherine Blackburn and St. Elmo. The guards exchanged glances. Wait here, the older one said, disappearing inside the fort while his companion kept them under watchful guard. Minutes stretched uncomfortably until the gate swung open to reveal a tall officer with iron-gray hair and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. Major William Reynolds had aged since Mason last saw him, lines of responsibility etched deeper around his eyes, but his gaze remained sharp and assessing. Reed? Recognition dawned in his weathered face. They told me you were dead after the fire. His eyes shifted to Ayanna and Kimimela, taking in their Apache features without comment. Not dead, sir, just lost for a time. Mason dismounted carefully, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "We need to speak privately. It's about the St. Elmo Treaty." Reynolds' expression hardened at the name. "Come with me, all of you." He led them through the fort to his private quarters, dismissing his orderly with instructions not to disturb them. Once inside, he closed the door and turned to face them, arms crossed. "Catherine spoke often of the treaty before her death," he said without preamble. "Said it would change everything if implemented properly. Then the fire happened, and Blackburn claimed all copies were destroyed." His eyes narrowed. "But that's not true, is it?" Mason glanced at Ayanna, who nodded and carefully removed the oilskin package from her pouch. She handed it to Mason, who presented it to Reynolds. "Not only does it still exist, sir, but it bears the Secretary of the Interior's signature. It's binding at the federal level." Reynolds took the package with careful hands, unwrapping it to reveal the copper tube within. He broke the wax seal and extracted the document, unrolling it with growing astonishment as he scanned its contents. "This changes everything," he murmured, reaching the signatures at the bottom. His finger traced the secretary's flowing script. "With this, Blackburn can't claim military necessity overrides Apache rights to the land or water." "There's more, sir," Mason said. "Catherine didn't die in an accident. The evidence suggests Blackburn arranged the fire to silence her when she discovered he was suppressing the treaty to sell water rights to private interests." Reynolds' head snapped up, shock giving way to cold fury. "Those are serious accusations, Reed." "I know, sir, and I can prove them." Over the next hour, they laid out the entire story. The raid on St. Elmo based on fabricated intelligence, Kimamella's imprisonment, Wesley's connection to Blackburn, Catherine's discovery of the aquifer's importance, and the conspiracy to monopolize water rights throughout the territory. When they finished, Reynolds sat in silence for a long moment, hands steepled before his face. "I always knew Theodore was ambitious," he finally said. "But this?" He shook his head. "Catherine was like a niece to me. Her father and I served together for 30 years. His jaw tightened. "If what you're saying is true." "It is," Kimamela interrupted, speaking for the first time since entering the fort. "I watched Colonel Blackburn order attack on peaceful village, heard him tell men to find treaty, saw him take list of those who survived." Her dark eyes held Reynolds' gaze steadily. 5 years I refused to tell where treaty hidden. 5 years watching my people die for white man's greed." Reynolds held her gaze, measuring her words. Then, with military decisiveness, he stood and moved to his desk, pulling out paper and pen. "I'm dispatching a company of men to Fort Garrison immediately. Blackburn will be arrested and brought to trial." He began writing rapidly. "The treaty will be sent to Washington with my strongest recommendation for immediate implementation." He glanced up. "You three will remain here under my protection until this is settled." Sir," Mason interjected, "Blackburn has powerful friends, men who stand to lose fortunes if the treaty is enforced." "I'm aware," Reynolds replied grimly, "which is why I'm sending my most trusted officers, men whose loyalty is beyond question." He sealed his orders. "And why I'll personally escort the treaty to the territorial governor tomorrow." Within the hour, a detachment of cavalry thundered out of Fort Gibson, bound for Fort Garrison, with orders to arrest Colonel Theodore Blackburn on charges of corruption, conspiracy, and murder. In his office at Fort Garrison, Colonel Blackburn read the hastily scrawled message for the third time, the paper trembling slightly in his hand despite his effort to maintain composure. "Treaty found, Reed alive, heading to Gibson." Just 8 words, but they represented the collapse of everything he'd built over decades of service. His eyes drifted to the map on his wall, where colored pins marked the locations of key water sources throughout the territory, sources that would have made him and his investors wealthy beyond imagination once development began. A commotion in the outer office drew his attention. The door burst open to admit Wesley McBride, his left arm crudely bandaged, blood seeping through the cloth. His face was ashen beneath the trail dust. "They found it," Blackburn said flatly, holding up the message. Wesley collapsed into a chair, exhaustion and defeat etched in every line of his body. "Navajo ambushed us at Ghost Canyon. Most of my men are dead." He looked up, his scarred face haggard. "Reed got away with the treaty and the old woman." Blackburn's composure finally cracked. He slammed his fist on the desk. 5 years. 5 years we've kept this contained. And now, he broke off, a new thought dawning. Reynolds. They've gone to William Reynolds. We still have friends at Gibson, Wesley suggested. Men who could intercept. No, Blackburn's voice was suddenly calm, eerily so. Reynolds was always too honorable for his own good. He'll have the treaty on its way to Washington within hours. He moved to the window, staring out at the parade ground where soldiers went about their duties, oblivious to their commander's impending downfall. What now? Wesley asked, the question hanging in the air like gun smoke. Before Blackburn could answer, a sentry's challenge rang out at the fort's gate. Both men turned to look as a column of cavalry in the distinctive blue of Fort Gibson entered the compound, their captain presenting papers to the sergeant of the guard. "They've come for me," Blackburn said with strange detachment. Wesley rose, wincing at the pain in his wounded arm. "The back exit, we can still—" "No," Blackburn's voice was firm. "There's nowhere to run that would be worth reaching." He opened his desk drawer and removed a small Derringer pistol. "You should go. This isn't your fight anymore." "Theodore," Wesley began, using his commander's given name for the first time in their decades-long association. "Go," Blackburn repeated. "You were following orders. You might still find leniency." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Tell them I forced your cooperation." Wesley hesitated, conflict evident in his scarred face. "They'll ask questions about why I followed you so blindly all these years." "Then tell them the truth," Blackburn said with sudden weariness. "Tell them you're my brother, my father's other son." The words hung between them, the acknowledgement Wesley had sought for a lifetime, finally given only at the end. "Half-brother," Wesley corrected bitterly. Not enough Blackburn blood to merit the name, just enough to merit the dirty work. "Blood is blood," Blackburn replied. "I kept you close, didn't I? Trusted you when I trusted no one else, but never acknowledged me, not even when you welcomed Reed into the family." Old pain laced Wesley's words. "Go," Blackburn said again, his voice softer now. "Brother." The single word seemed to straighten Wesley's shoulders, giving him strength to nod once and slip through the side door just as the main door burst open. Heavy boots sounded in the corridor outside. Wesley hesitated, then slipped through a side door just as the main door burst open. Captain James Fordham of Fort Gibson stood framed in the doorway, arrest warrant in hand. "Colonel Theodore Blackburn, by order of Major William Reynolds, you are under arrest for corruption, conspiracy against the United States government, and the murders of Catherine Blackburn Reed and Sarah Reed." Blackburn nodded as if he'd been expecting this precise wording. "A moment to gather my papers, Captain?" Fordham hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Be quick about it." As the captain stepped back to confer with his lieutenants, Blackburn moved to his desk one final time. He quickly scrawled a note, folded it, and addressed it to Major William Reynolds. Then, with a glance to ensure the soldiers were momentarily distracted, he raised the Derringer to his temple. The shot echoed through Fort Garrison like a final punctuation mark on Theodore Blackburn's legacy of ambition and betrayal. 2 days after sending his men to Fort Garrison, Major Reynolds called Mason to his office. Ayanna and Kimamela had been given quarters in the fort's guest section, treated with a respect rarely afforded to Apache visitors. "Blackburn is dead," Reynolds announced without preamble as Mason entered. "Took his own life rather than face arrest." Mason absorbed this, emotions conflicting within him. The man responsible for Catherine's death, for the St. Elmo massacre, had escaped justice, yet had also faced a final reckoning of sorts. "And Wesley?" he asked. "Surrendered the following morning. He's been cooperative, revealing details about the water rights conspiracy and those involved." Reynolds hesitated. "He's also disclosed something rather surprising about his relationship with Blackburn." "Sir?" "They were half-brothers." Reynolds watched Mason's reaction carefully. "Same father, different mothers. Wesley's mother was a camp follower. Blackburn kept the connection secret his entire career, using the family tie to ensure Wesley's absolute loyalty while never publicly acknowledging him." Mason sank into a chair, the revelation illuminating 5 years of hostility in a new light. "That explains Wesley's hatred toward me. Blackburn accepted me as Catherine's husband, as family, while keeping his own blood relation hidden in the shadows." "A lifetime of resentment," Reynolds agreed. Wesley claims Blackburn promised him recognition, property, a legitimate place in society, always after one more mission, one more dirty job. And St. Elmo was the worst of those jobs, Mason said grimly. Reynolds nodded. According to Wesley's statement, Blackburn ordered him to ensure no evidence of the treaty survived. When Catherine began investigating, those orders extended to arranging an accident that would silence her permanently. He killed Catherine on Blackburn's orders, Mason whispered, the final piece falling into place. His own half-sister. Family loyalty twisted into something monstrous, Reynolds said quietly. Blackburn's final betrayal was leaving Wesley to face the consequences alone. 1 month later, Mason stood in the territorial governor's office in Santa Fe, watching as the official seal was affixed to the document before them. The St. Elmo Treaty, now fully ratified and acknowledged, would ensure Apache rights to their ancestral lands and the precious water that flowed beneath them. A historic day, Governor Lawrence Prescott declared, signing his name with a flourish. This treaty establishes a precedent for fair dealings with native tribes throughout the territories. Mason nodded his thoughts on Catherine. She would have appreciated the formal ceremony, the legal weight being given to the document she'd fought so hard to protect. Beside him stood Ayanna and Kimamela, both dressed in a blend of traditional Apache garments in more conventional attire, a visual representation of the cultural bridge the treaty sought to build. The Federal Water Commission will begin work immediately on implementing the shared resource provisions, the governor continued, handing the document to his secretary for proper filing. Mrs. Whitefeather, your appointment as a special advisor to the commission has been approved at the highest levels. Kimamela acknowledged this with dignified grace. At 63, after 5 years of captivity, she had emerged as a powerful voice for her people, her knowledge of both Apache traditions and the treaty's provisions making her invaluable to the integration process. And Mr. Reed, the governor turned to Mason, the official investigation has fully exonerated you of any wrongdoing in the St. Elmo incident. Colonel Blackburn's confession letter corroborates your account entirely. The letter found on Blackburn's desk had been unexpected. A full admission of his crimes, from falsifying intelligence about hostile warriors at St. Elmo to arranging the fire that killed Catherine and young Sarah. Whether written from a last-minute attack of conscience or a desire to control his final narrative, it had removed any lingering doubts about the conspiracy. Thank you, Governor, Mason replied simply. No official exoneration could erase the weight of those years, the lives lost, but it provided a foundation upon which to build something new. Wesley McBride had surrendered himself the day after Blackburn's suicide, offering complete cooperation in exchange for leniency. His testimony had exposed the full extent of the water rights conspiracy, implicating several prominent businessmen and politicians who now faced their own legal reckonings. As they left the governor's office, stepping into the bright sunshine of a Santa Fe afternoon, Ayanna touched Mason's arm lightly. What now? She asked, echoing the question she'd posed in Ghost Canyon. Mason had an answer this time. Now we build something. 1 year later, a small school stood on the border between Apache lands and settlement territories. Its walls were built from local stone, its roof from pine timbers. Children of both cultures filled the simple classroom, Apache children learning to read English, settler children studying traditional plant knowledge and tribal history. Kimamela had established a healing practice that drew patients from both communities, her reputation growing as both medicine woman and cultural ambassador. Her knowledge of the aquifer had proved invaluable to the Water Commission, ensuring sustainable use that would benefit generations to come. Late one afternoon, as the children departed for home, Mason and Ayanna climbed the small hill behind the school. From this vantage point, they could see both the Apache village to the east and the growing settlement to the west. Separate communities now connected by the shared resource of water and the bridge of understanding the school represented. Catherine would be proud, Ayanna said, settling beside Mason on a sun-warmed boulder. Her treaty has done more than protect land and water. Mason nodded, his eyes on the horizon where the setting sun painted the desert in gold and crimson. It's given people a chance to see each other as more than enemies. In the years since their journey to Ghost Canyon, their relationship had deepened gradually, naturally. No formal ceremony had marked their union, but they lived and worked as partners in every sense, their shared experiences forging a bond that transcended cultural differences. Mason reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a silver pendant in the shape of an eagle, its wings outstretched in flight. He had commissioned it from a silversmith in Santa Fe, incorporating designs from the tattoo on Ayana's shoulder. "For you," he said simply, placing it in her palm. "A reminder that some spirits never truly leave us." Ayana's fingers closed around the pendant, her eyes meeting his with an understanding that needed no words. She slipped the silver chain over her head, the eagle coming to rest against her heart. Above them, as if summoned by the gesture, a real eagle soared on the thermal currents, its wingspan casting a brief shadow across the hillside. Mason watched its flight, thinking of Catherine and Sarah, of Nida and all those who had died at St. Elmo. Their loss would always be part of him, but no longer the only part. "Look," Ayana said softly, pointing to where several children, Apache and settler alike, played together near the stream that wound through the valley, their laughter carrying on the evening air. The future they would have wanted. As darkness began to gather around them, they made their way back down the hill toward the small home they shared. Behind them, the eagle continued its solitary flight, free and unbound, a silent guardian of the peace so dearly won.